Map fans, the people have spoken, and so today we're going to look at Graphical Modeler in QGIS. I put out a poll a little while ago and asked what you would like to see next in the videos, so thanks a million to those of you that voted on that. There will be more polls in the future, so you can decide where we go next with Graphical Modeler. Bit like a choose your own geo adventure or a Bandersnatch, Mapper Snatch. Anyway, this is the first in hopefully a series. Let's get stuck in. We are in QGIS3 and I'm using 3.6 for this, NUSA, the reasons for which will become clear later on. And I've just used the OS Open Zoom Stack vectors and clipped out this railway line here. And we're going to use that to just demo how we can get started with Graphical Modeler. Now, Graphical Modeler is an awesome tool. It allows you to record your workflows, to tinker with things, and to chain lots of models together. But to start with, I'm just going to have a look at the buffer tool. So if you have your processing toolbox open, and you can open that by going up to processing and then clicking on toolbox, and it'll appear over here. So I'm going to use the buffer tool, and if I just search for it here, we can see it's in vector geometry, and this is what the buffer tool looks like when it opens up. The help on this is very good, and if you hit the help button you will be taken to the buffer tool, which you can see here, and this lets you know what all the parameters etc. are. So if we want to get started with Graphical Modeler, I can close the buffer tool and go up to processing again and click on Graphical Modeler. And that will open this window. Now this is open full size. I don't actually want it full size. I'll just shrink that down. And in Graphical Modeler, over on the left hand side, we have a bunch of parameters that we can use as inputs, and we have a bunch of algorithms that we can also use, and we have a blank canvas. The model properties that will be asked for are the name and then the group. Now the group becomes important over in your processing toolbox, as does the name. You can see over here in processing that we have a section called models. Now if I just get rid of my previous search, this is what the processing toolbox looks like normally. Here's the models section, and in the models we've got different groups. I've got one called custom and one called GM demo, and within that I've got a bunch of models and that's their names. So for this one, instead of calling it GM Demo, I'm going to call it GM Live. And for the name, I'm just going to call this Buffer Simple. There we are. So that sets our model up, and I could save this now if I wanted to, and save the model. It's going to ask me where I'd like to save it, and I can give it a file name. So I'll call it GML for GM Live, and I'll call it Buffer 01 and save that. Now if we go over to processing and just drop this down, you can see I've now got a new group name, GM Live, and if I have a look in there, I've got a model called Buffer Simple. If your model closes for any reason, like queue crashing or something strange like that, you can always go back to your processing toolbox, right click and go to edit model, and that will allow you to edit your model. Now if you make this queue window live again, if you just go down to your taskbar, your model will actually be there as well. So you can open your model back up. That's great. Now what I'd like to do is start building this model, and the first thing we need to do is create an input layer, and that's going to be a vector layer. So I'm going to drag that onto my canvas, and it's going to ask me for a parameter name, and I'm just going to call that input. It will give you the option of geometry type, so you could tie this specifically to points, lines, polygons, or any geometry type or geometry not required. So I'm going to go with that. And mandatory, it is going to be mandatory. We always need an input, so I'll OK that. And there you can see our input has arrived in our canvas. Now I'd like to use a buffer on the input, so I'm going to go to algorithms, I'm going to search for buffer, I've already done this, and in our vector geometry you can see the buffer option available there. So I'll pick that up, drag it across, and here's our buffer. Now you can see all the parameters that we've got here that we can input. I'm not going to input anything. I'm just going to choose the input layer. So because we've got this vector layer in our canvas, we can select it as our input layer. And Q's pretty bright, so it knows that we're going to be using that, and I'll OK that. So here's our buffer, and you can see this line joins our input layer to the buffer tool, and then we've got an out as well. So I would like to create an output, and if I just double click on that, I can scroll down here, and I can enter the name if this is the final result. So I'm going to do that and call it buffered. Okay, and there's our output. So you can see that our input is a yellow vector layer and the green is for the output, and here is our buffer. So this is looking pretty good. I'm going to save the model. Model was correctly saved. Excellent news. I'm going to go back to the processing window, into GM Live, and I'll open up the buffer simple. Double click. There's our input, and Q's going to read what input possibilities are in our map already. And our buffered output layer, if I leave this blank, it's going to create a temporary layer. If I was to choose a location and give it a file name, then it would create an actual file. But I'm just going to leave it as a scratch file at the moment, and I'm going to run it. Boom! It has run. We've got buffered over in our layers panel. And if we have a look at our map and zoom right in, we've got some buffering going on. Excellent. Now the railway line that I'm using is actually a multi-part line, so you can see that the buffer is kind of split for each separate feature. I don't really want that, and I don't want it to be, I'm not sure how far this buffer was, but it doesn't look very big. If I go into the log, you can see that the distance was 10, so 10 meters. We haven't got any dissolve, so the dissolve is false, and we've only got 5 segments. The segments is how many segments are going to create the buffer, and you can see this more when you do this with points, but if we zoom right in here, you can see there where we've got segmented ends. And if you ramp up these segments, then you get a smoother curve as opposed to vertices. So our buffer is working, that's great, we've got a model, but it's not very advanced at the moment. Let's go back in and edit our model again. Now, on the buffer, we have all these parameters, and if I double click on my buffer, you can see all these parameters, and currently we've got these set. Now I could change these, I could change that to 100, and I could change this to 50, and OK that. Let's save it, and then if I go back and run the buffer again, run that, we've got a new buffer layer. Oh, 2 new buffer layers because I got a bit trigger happy. And if we zoom in, you can see how this is much more rounded. It's not as segmented. And if I bring the rail clip on top, you can see the buffer is much wider. So that'll be a 100 meter buffer instead of a 10 meter buffer. So that's nice. If you're playing around with tools, you can just go in and change things. I'd like to have a bit more control when I open up my tool though. So currently I can only put in an input and choose an output. But there's so many more things we could do. So let's go in and edit our model. And if I do a plus here on the buffer tool, you can see all the things that we can set. So we've got that dissolve result, mitre limit, join style, end cap, segments, distance, all of these things. Let us start playing with these. I'm just going to resize my model so that I can see what's going on. And if you have a big model and you need to get it all in one window, you can hit the zoom full at the top here, and there we are. I can see what's happening. Now then, with the, let's do the dissolve first. So dissolve result, if I have a look in here, dissolve result, where is it? It is no currently. So we can have yes or no. All right. Now, if I was to go to the buffer docs, I would find out that dissolve result is in fact a boolean. So I'm going to bring in a boolean. and I'm going to call it dissolve results. And is it going to be checked? Do I want it to be checked? Yes, I'm going to have it checked. It's not mandatory. So that's just the default. It is going to be checked. Okay. And for our dissolve results, instead of having yes or no, I am going to use a model input, and I'm going to use dissolve result. Marvelous. So now you can see that dissolve result has an input as well. This is getting interesting. So let's run our model. Dissolve result is optional, so we can have yes, we want the dissolve result, or no, we don't want the dissolve result. So let's run that again with dissolve result. I've said that word far too many times now. And we'll run that. And we've got a new buffered layer. I think it's this blue one. And you can see with dissolve result checked, we now have all of these dissolved. If I put on the previous one, you can see where it ends for different line segments. And I've dissolved it here, so it's just one continuous buffer going all the way along our line. Much nicer. Now let's get our model back. There we are. What else would I like to change? I'd like to have the segments, so I can put in a number for the segments. Pop that in, and I'm going to call it segments. The number type is going to be an integer. Default value is going to be 5, and it's not mandatory. Okay. And again, if I go into my buffer tool and I go for segments, click on this little button, and it's going to be a model input, and it's going to be segments. Okay. And you can see how that joins up. Very nice. So let's run it again. And it asks for segments, and I'm going to go for 50. Yes, that'll do. And there's another result, and another result, because I'm getting trigger happy again. So our model's starting to take shape, and this is pretty good. What else could we add into this? I think I'll go for, oops, I've got 2 versions of my model. Notice that I chose to edit this model, and that's a saved version, but I've got this version that I'm actually working on at the moment. I'd also like to include distance, so I'm going to go again for another number, and I will call this one distance, and I'm going to leave this as a float because I might want to do, I don't know, 100.5 meters or something like that. The default value I'm going to set to 10. It's not mandatory, or maybe it is mandatory. Yeah, let's keep this one mandatory. And okay that. And what else do I need to do? I need to go in here and go to distance, and it's going to be a model input, and it's going to be distance. Okay. Ooh, we're getting crossed lines here. If anybody's ever used FME, you will know that having models with crossed lines is frowned upon. So I'm just going to leave those guys up there, have my input there, and my buffered on the outside here. Excellent. And if we run that, as you'd expect, we now have a distance, which is a float, and it's set to 10. Now, one thing that I did come across with this, and I mentioned a roadblock, is that you may have noticed that these are not following a logical order. Well, they are, but it's not the order I would like. So we've got dissolve, distance, input, segments, and buffered. Now these appear, the inputs appear to be, or the parameters appear to be ordered alphabetically. And this is not really what I would like. I would like them to be ordered more logically, so I'd like input at the top and then have all these parameters underneath. I'm just going to close that out and show you a little workaround that you can do. I'm just going to remove buffered first, and then I'll get rid of these guys. So I'm just going to rebuild from scratch. The one thing that I would like to show you first of all is how we are going to do this. So I'm going to bring in a vector layer again, and that's going to be our input. But instead of calling it input, I'll call it 0, 1, input. And because these are working on an alphabetical sorting, if I put 0, 1, then my input is going to be the first one. Geometry not required, and it's mandatory. Awesome. Then I'm going to put in the buffer tool. Oh, where is my buffer tool? There it is. Bring that in, and it's going to be 01 input. Awesome. Now I'm going to do the parameters again, and I'm going to choose the order. I'm going to add them in as the order I would like, and I'm going to add, which one should we have next? Let's have distance, because that feels like one of the most important. So I'll bring this in as a number, and it's going to be a float. So it's going to be 02, because I want this one to be the second. 02 distance, and the default value is going to be 10. And it will be mandatory. Awesome. Ooh, I can feel that coffee taking effect, so we should be able to get through this bit fairly quickly. And all cylinders right now. So I'll just set all of these up super quick. And then show you what to do next. Let me work around in order to get your parameters in order. Right, that took me far longer than it should have, but I think we've got it nailed. So I'm going to go for save model as, so I can keep my original model, and I'm just going to save this one as model GML buffer 02. Save that. That's good. All right, and let's hit run. Now you can see we've got the input at the top, then we choose our distance, then we've got our segments, and then we can choose whether or not to dissolve. So that puts them in order. Now it looks a little bit hokey with 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3, etc. So if I just close that, is our model still open? It is. I'll go into here and just edit this name, and I'll do that for all of them. Okay, so I've renamed all of them, and I am going to save again, and then let's run it. And you can see we've got rid of those numbers, but because our model was initially built with the numbers in place, QGIS just orders them that way, and you can rename afterwards. So that's a little workaround to get our model parameters in order. And this is looking pretty good now. I'm quite happy with that. Graphical Modeler is really powerful in QGIS, and you might be wondering what is the point of just rebuilding the buffer tool. We've already got a buffer tool that comes pre-packaged with Q. But we can start to chain multiple tools together. So you could have a buffer followed by a clip, and you can actually record entire workflows using the Graphical Modeler. This can be useful because if you revisit a project and you're not sure exactly the steps that you took to get to an output, Graphical Modeler will have recorded that for you if you've been using it. Another neat tool that we've got, and this is why I was using NUSA 3.6 as opposed to the long-term release 3.4. Up at the top here, you can output your model in various different ways, and one of those ways is a Python script. So let's export it as a script algorithm. And this is the Python code that actually creates that model. So that is pretty cool. Just one click, there's all your Python script. So if you need to go in and start putting in loops and tinkering around using Python, you can actually do that. Now I'm going to save this script, and it'll just give me the default save location, and I'll call this GML script 01, and I'll save that. And if I go back to my processing and drop down the scripts here, and into GM Live, you can see I've got buffer simple in there. Now if I was to open buffer simple just by double clicking it, here is our script, and we've got the little GUI. Do notice though that our dissolve results segments, all the parameters have come back in the wrong order. I'm not sure why that happens. Could do with a little more investigating on that one. But that's a very simple introduction on how we can use Graphical Modeler in QGIS. Now, I did say that I'd put out a poll at the beginning of this video, and thanks again to those of you that answered it. On that note, a huge thank you to Dawn, who won the prestigious award of Comment of the Month last month. So Dawn from Tasmania, thanks a lot. The award goes to the most innovative comment. It had nothing to do at all with Dawn buying me a coffee, but, well, it might have helped a little bit. Thanks a lot, Dawn. If you would like to support the channel, you can buy me a coffee by using the link in the description below. That's really cool. If you are not inclined to use coffee to promote things, no problem. You can choose instead to hit the thumbs up, to like the videos, to share the videos. That's a huge boost to the channel. And also don't forget to subscribe. There will be another poll out soon to find out where you'd like me to go next with this model, with Graphical Modeler. So do keep an eye out for those. And thanks a lot for watching. Oh, happy mapping. Now I'd like to use the buffer tool, so I'm just going to pick that up and drag it across. Oh, cute. How I love you.